Hi there, this is Matt Wakeling and you're listening to the Guitar Speak podcast, produced here in Sydney, Australia and zoomed all around the place through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher and lots of other good podcatcher things. Now, just a little announcement. We're taking a very short break. We'll be back on July the 8th or 9th, 2017, depending on what part of the world you live in, with all new episodes. And we've got some great stuff lined up, including some guests from the UK, from the United States, and here in Australia as well. And we're really excited about the Sydney Guitar Festival. So there'll be a bunch of news on that coming up very, very soon. But to keep you occupied in the meantime, I've packaged together two of my first interviews. I think they were interviews 5 and 9 from two of my favourite Victorians, Brett Kingman and Bob Spencer. Now, Brett Kingman is a great player, plays with James Reyne, has been a member of James' band for the last 30 years or so. He was also a member of the Uncanny X-Men and plenty of other really important Australian artists. He also has, he was one of the pioneers, really, of high-quality YouTube gear reviews. Now, gear reviews are all over the net now, of course, but there's still only a handful that are done, with a lot of quality and a lot of integrity and knowledge, and Brett is certainly one of those guys. His site, check this out, has had over 20 million hits in the last 8 or so years, and it's just going from strength to strength. So it was great talking to Brett. And Bob Spencer, guitar player with Skyhooks and The Angels, and Black Cat Moan, love those guys, and his own solo work he's working on now. Now, I got to speak to Bob Spencer because Brett Kingman got me in touch after I interviewed him, so I really appreciated that. So it only seemed fitting that I paired these two guys together for this in replay episode of the Guitar Speak podcast. So here we go. First we'll hear from Brett Kingman, then we'll move on to the interview with Bob Spencer. To the Guitar Speak podcast.
My great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hey, you've just come off tour with James Reyne. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure. We've been on a number of tours for the last, nearly 3 years. We've been supporting Chris Isaac. That was the last tour that we just finished, and before that we were on a sort of a greatest hits run. Mm-hmm. And we did an Australian Crawl greatest hits run. James Reyne plays Australian Crawl, and before that we were out on the road with Rod Stewart. And before that we've been on an APIA tour, so it's been a never-ending tour in terms of being at the airport pretty much every Thursday or Friday morning for the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm kind of glad that it is over for the next few months at least.
Yeah, sure.
Not because I don't like playing with James, but because I'm happy to be here on weekends with my wife and daughter, who are getting a little shirty, and understandably.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good to hear. So you're doing some supports and headlines and festivals and things then, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, lots of headlines and support to Rod Stewart. Sure. And a sort of a co-headline with Chris over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So it's been interesting playing humongous venues and then some modest pubs as well, which I prefer actually because people are right in your face.
Yeah, cool. I might just back up. What got you started playing guitar in the first place, Brett?
There's an interesting question. I think it was actually walking into a friend's older brother's bedroom in 1971 when I was probably not much older than 8. Well, I wouldn't have been older than 8 in 1971. And hearing Slade Alive, which was a live album that Slade, the glam band from the early 70s, put out. Very heavy album. And the power that was coming through those speakers just transformed me into something like an Exocet missile. So I thought, that's it. I'm going to be a guitar player. From that moment on,
okay, awesome.
I was programmed to be a guitar player, and so I ran around school pretending I could be a guitar player until I actually got an acoustic guitar, which was a $20 Suzuki, and then I was obsessed with learning how to play the thing, and I had some formal lessons for about 1.5 years when I was 9, 10 years old from a elderly lady who unfortunately passed away after that period of time. So, but I'd elevated quite quickly through classes and even at that young age. So I just continued on my own journey after that and taught myself and spent maybe 6 hours every day until I was 17 or thereabouts, at least 6 hours every day practicing.
Wow. And who were you listening to around then? So after Slade,
Well,
what was the other big
we're
thing?
talking about 72, 73 onwards through to 1982. So it was the concurrent releases at that time, and pretty much every classic rock album between 72 and 1980 is still acknowledged as the best period of, or the golden age of classic rock. So that's what I grew up on. And so it was, initially it was David Bowie and it was Slade and it was T-Rex, the English guitar-driven pop glam stuff, I suppose, and then it graduated rather to Zeppelin. I remember when John Bonham died, I wore a black armband to school.
Okay.
Sabbath, all of the Yes, who were challenging, still are, in terms of technical prowess, from Steve Howe and trying to learn his stuff. And I still listen to those bands. So that's who it was. And then 77 rolled in and I was a skateboarder, and Devo and the Sex Pistols and those sorts of bands were in vogue with that community. So I went off on a sort of a punk tangent for a little bit, but it was not challenging enough in terms of I could play that stuff easily. Mm-hmm. So I then went back into sort of tougher stuff to play. Frank Zappa, Van Halen appeared, Metallica appeared early on in the 80s. Yeah, all the usual suspects. Hendrix and Clapton never got a look in, and rarely do today. I have hardly any of I don't have any Clapton records on any medium. I think I've got his Robert Johnson homage somewhere. And Hendrix, I'm only kind of dipping my toes into now.
Okay. So I've read you were doing gigs when you were 12. What sort of gigs does a 12-year-old pull in Victoria?
Well, 12-year-old doesn't really pull many gigs at all. We're talking about Victoria in the 1970s. No internet, no mobile phones, a couple of television stations. I was playing with the local sort of square dance band that had a family at my school, and they were called the Chubbies. And so I was invited to come and play along with the Chubbies.
Nice.
And I'd sent a cheerio to my still friend Dick Custerson, who was the drummer at the time, and and then after that I was involved in every school band that I could talk my way into. Most of them were hosted by kids that were considerably older than me, and so we used to jam Zeppelin and Sabbath day in and day out.
Cool, awesome.
Yeah.
And
play parties and stuff.
Yeah, right. So when did you move into professional playing?
Shivers me timbers. I think that would have been, if we're talking sort of national level professional playing, I was always paid to play guitar at churches and stuff like that. I'm now a very much lapsed Catholic, but in the early 70s I didn't have much of a choice, so I was playing weddings and funerals, and they used to pay.
Okay.
Funnily enough. And then, but on a rock and roll level, I had a little band here in Melbourne I was part of a little band called The Adventure, who were the first sort of indie band to appear on Countdown without a record deal. And then after that I was recruited into the Uncanny X-Men when Ronnie had domestic restrictions put on him. He wasn't allowed to tour for a couple of years. So I was brought in at a pretty young age and to finish off the album and then go on tour with them.
Cool. So this is like early 80s, I guess, when they were
That
hitting?
was about 85, 86.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I stayed with them for nearly a year. But I had to leave them in the lurch, which I didn't want to do but I had to because I'd met James Reyne at a nightclub and he'd just come back from LA having finished his first solo album sessions. Mm-hmm. And broken up and split up Australian Crawl not long before that, and said, "I hear you play pretty good guitar. Do you want to join my band?" So, of course, I said yes. And the next morning, I was part of his band and had to give the news to the X-Men, who were not very happy. So, understandably, but fortunately, my brother Scott stepped in. He was very young at the time, but he did it, and the tour continued. Everybody was reasonably happy.
Cool.
Me.
Awesome. So early James Reyne, I'm thinking tracks like Hammerhead. I used to love that.
Yep.
I was probably just. I was born in '71, so by the time Hammerhead came out, I was sort of getting into playing and a little. So that was a fun track.
Yep. Hammerhead, Fall of Rome, Rip It Up. That first album had a lot of great songs on it.
Yeah.
And we're actually toying with the idea of touring it because it'll be its 30th anniversary, believe it or not, next year.
Wow. Awesome.
That's how long I've been involved with James and his family, who I'm now married to his sister, Elizabeth.
Ah, okay.
And I'm talking to you from the kitchen in which the Reyne family grew up in. We ended up buying the family home.
There you go.
Yes. So the Kingmans and the Reynes are now ensconsibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Intertwined.
Yeah. So you've got to play for him now.
Well, I don't have to, and I've refused the current tour that he's about to, or politely declined, I should say, the current tour that he's about to embark on with Mark Seymour.
Oh, okay.
We're going out to do a national run together in an acoustic configuration, and Josh Owen, who is now playing the other guitar, we both share lead and rhythm duties in the band, is a Melbourne-based player, phenomenally talented, very classy and a lovely bloke. He will be going out to do that run with James, so that will be something special for people who go to those gigs because he will bring an entirely new palette of approach to it, and it'll be great. And I will rejoin them when the summer festivals start in late October.
Okay, cool. So just backing up then, after you joined James's band,
Yes.
you still seem to be pulling a lot of sideband sort of gigs. You became quite well known as a sideman to choose for touring and records.
Yeah,
and stuff.
I became a bit of a hired gun, which was nice. So I ended up in Daryl Braithwaite's touring act for a while because he'd just released The Edge, and it was recorded by all of the same personnel pretty much that did James's early work, and written by Simon Hussey, who co-wrote a lot of those tunes. And James's first album. Anyway, so I ended up in Daryl's band. Then I ended up in Vicar and Linda's band. I was in Deborah Byrne's band for a while. I was a hired gun for a producer here called Mark Forrester, so I played a lot on Peter Andre stuff and Shantuzzi stuff.
Yeah.
And
That's another Reyne, isn't it? Didn't David Reyne play
David
the
in the
Shantuzzi?
Shantuzzi's for a couple of years. Yep, that's right.
There you go.
And then I did Hair, the musical, for 8 months or something, as just a guitar player in the pit.
Okay.
And then sorry.
Oh, are you a good reader? Is that how you got? Is that part of your
reader,
thing?
which was unfortunate because I had to learn 43 pieces of music inside 2 weeks. I don't know why I said yes to that gig.
Yeah.
I think just nothing was happening for a couple of months, so I just said okay.
Sure.
So that was very challenging, but I did learn it, and to their satisfaction apparently, and we had a lot of fun until I got sick of doing 8 shows a week and had to pull out for boredom and health reasons. It was driving me completely mental, so I stopped that. And then I was in a band called Bigger Than Jesus in Melbourne for a while, which was fronted by Steve Lucas from X, and it was very heavy thrash band. Mm-hmm. Lot of fun, but we were insane party animals, and it was getting to be dangerous. So I left that and ended up back on the road with James after he came back from the Rio tour, the first one. Brad Robinson talked me back into the band.
Great.
And I haven't really been off since, but I still do a lot of corporate work with people like Joe Camilleri and Ross Wilson and a lot of the heritage acts. So I know all of those guys pretty well, and I've had a lot of fun with them on boats, cruise ships, and corporate tours, and the Apia tour, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, these guys could hire anyone. What do you think it takes to be a really good sideman and just to keep working as you have?
Well, the first thing that I know that I look for in the band, and James looks for, because we're really the only constant members in his band apart from Johnny Watson, the drummer, is personality. If you can't get on with somebody, or there's something that irks you about them, regardless of their talent, you're a fool if you go any further in terms of saying, yeah, come on tour, because you'll drive each other mental. And that has happened in the past where, you just don't even want to get in the same car as a person, let alone sit next to them on a plane or something like that. Unfortunately, not too often. So you've got to be very careful about amicability. And I think that I try to be tolerable to most people, and that's what's got me through. And after that, it's your ability to cut the gig, of course. Yep. So, first and foremost is your ability to be social, and then you've got to be able to cut it. Of course, if you can't cut it, well then, you're not going to get the job either. So I've been able to adapt myself to all of the styles so far required by all of the above aforementioned, which hasn't been hard because they're all pretty classic rock and or pop. And I grew up on the Stones and Keith Richards and Nile Rodgers later on after all those other acts that we spoke about later. So and when I actually study a style, let's say funk, Nile Rodgers, I will absolutely throw myself into Nile's head for 3-4 months until I've nailed it. Not just from a technical level, but from the objective approach level as well, the psychological level of how to approach that style. So that's helped me a lot, I think, in terms of being able to play various styles. I can even bluff my way through jazz if I have to. Pretty loosely though.
Sure. We've all bluffed our way through some jazz. I've got a genre I call wedding jazz. It means I can play moon dance in any key you want. Yeah. But I need a chart for all the things you are.
Yeah, and even if I had a chart thrown in front of me with all the diminished and 11s and 13s and all that stuff, see, I don't know anything about that stuff.
Sure.
So I have to play by ear, which is fortunate because I can play by ear. That's how I pretty much learned to play, with sitting in front of the television and playing with anything that came along, or the radio, and not restricting myself to, I'm not going to play that. That's that's in 3/4. It sounds wussy on everything, and that's what I teach students today, is to not to restrict yourself.
Cool.
Anything but.
When you've got a gig or tour coming up, do you? I want to talk about your gear review channel in a little bit, but you seem like you've got a bit of a collection of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have a go-to rig, or do you tailor it depending on the artist in terms of gear, guitars, amps, pedals?
Well, nowadays I use Fractal Audio stuff on stage pretty much exclusively.
Okay, yeah.
I even have an affiliation with Fractal Audio. I'm a beta tester for them now. I do video demos for them. But the reason I got in bed with them in the first place was because I've always favoured cutting-edge technology, always, not just musical but computer-wise as well.
Okay.
Always had an interest in it, and always tried to exploit the most that I possibly can out of whatever the medium is. So the Axe-Fx was really, for me, an extension of things like Digitex 2101 that appeared in the 80s.
Yeah. That had the tube built in. It was
That's right.
A couple of units high.
Yep.
Cool.
All that stuff I've mucked around with and used with abandonment on stage at one point or another. So the Axe-Fx for me was the pinnacle of that sort of technology. So I just bought one.
Yeah, awesome.
And I haven't looked back since. And that was 3 or 4 years ago, I think.
Awesome.
Now I have all of their products, and it's pretty much all I use on stage. The front of house guys, be it at a pub or an arena with 25,000 people in it, will not let me use an amp or anything else because it just sounds so great. Yeah. And they're getting gorgeous stereo feeds with no spill. I can dial up any amp or cabinet I want from, a couple of 100 different sorts, as well as the effects.
Yep.
The controller board sits in front of me. It's connected by one XLR cable, so I don't even need to feed it power. It's just ace. And I've got 2 wedges in front of me blasting 500 watts each in stereo at my face. That's just you know, people say they miss their cabs. You should try that.
That's cool.
So,
I was going to ask about cabs. So with the James Reyne tour, is that like, are you using in-ear foldback for that, or you just got the blasting wedges?
wedges in front of me.
Okay.
If they're huge stages like I don't know, one of the big outdoor shows or one of the big arenas like Rod Laver down here in Melbourne, I'll have satellite wedges planted on the sides of the stage as well, because I use a wireless so I can run around and make it look a bit animated.
Yeah.
And the problem with wedges is as soon as you step, 4 or 5 feet away from them on either side, they're fairly directional and you lose it. So I've got to have satellites planted around, which is great. I love that. And the other guys don't mind it either, so it works out fine. Innies I've never toyed with and won't until they work out some sort of spatial dimension algorithm that allows you to kind of feel where you are, because at the moment it's two-dimensional,
Yes.
one-dimensional almost. You can't get away from it. You can't get a feeling of space.
Yes.
To a great degree. So, no, I haven't gone down the in-ear path yet.
Okay, cool. With the X, I've talked to a few guys who are using it. Peter Northcott up here in Sydney, Michael Dolce up here.
We all collaborate.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. The you would know probably more than most, like the history of modelling. The early modelers, even if they sounded kind of good, I used to have one of those kidney bean pods, and some of the sounds were usable, but it never felt really great. Do you reckon Axifex has covered that bridge?
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm. I do, yes.
Yeah, cool.
The Johnson J station was a great one from that period.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. The desktop sort of thing, hey? And they ended up doing amps and things.
And appeared at about the same time, or not long after, maybe a month after the first Line 6 pod came out. So there was obvious comparisons. I preferred the J station. Just the sounds were a bit more organic and better. And even it still stands it still stands up today, I reckon. But to answer your question, the Axifex, which is really the only recent one that I'm familiar with, Line 6 haven't availed me a Helix yet, and Kemper will probably never let me try one of their gigs because they know that I'm associated with Fractal Audio. So that's okay, and that's understandable. Although disappointed, because I would like to try them at some point. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people want an Axifex to do exactly what an amp does. I want it to sound like a 1959 Super Lead Plexi, and I want to feel that sound level pressure from an early basket weave TV quad box. I don't do that. I use it. If I wanted that, I'd get one on stage. So I actually use it for what it is capable of, and cut all of those kind of fence barriers, and not to be too particular about making it emulate something else, although they're great starting blocks.
Sure.
But I might like something like a Carolan triptych amp through a 1x12 cabinet, all modelled, of course, just on a in front of 20,000 people, just because the sound is focused more. So, yeah, I've never been fussed about the absolute accuracy of the modelling, but it is a good starting block. Yeah, sure. I'm one of the outside square thinkers, I think. So others want that. Well, it doesn't sound like the 65 twin to me. Well, get a 65 twin, man. So that's my only answer.
Yeah, cool.
And even Cliff, the guy, and the guys who program at Fractal Audio will say, these are, if you want the real thing, use the real thing, because this is so much more. And they're quite right, it is. It is so much more.
Yeah, cool.
The potential is vast. For enjoyment, relaxation, I'll go and turn the thing on and just pick an amp that I've never tried before. So some crazy exotic thing that Cliff has modelled, and maybe one of his own Dumbles. He owns a couple apparently, and just muck around with it for a while and see what I can do with it. So it's the gift that keeps on giving for me.
Cool. One video I loved on your site, you had, I can't remember what the patch, I can't remember anything about it other than like you're working your guitar volume like you would with any other amp, and the touch and response to my ear. Obviously playing it you're going to feel it differently, but to my ear it sounds like, okay, I can hear you digging in, I can hear you backing off on the guitar. Yeah. And that stuff modelling hasn't always done very well, I guess. No,
well, Cliff takes great pains to make sure that kind of dynamic is included in the algorithm, which wouldn't be easy, I don't think. And you're quite right. I am a big fan of the pinky on the volume knob. I've never used the volume pedal ever. and it does exactly what I could do when I was running Marshalls or Fender backline or whatever. So, it's a mix. It's a great mixture of old and new.
Cool.
With all of those cool dynamics that you've just, a great example that you've just pointed out.
Sure, cool. What about guitars? What are you playing? Is that per gig basis or?
I have. It is. I try to think like that, but inevitably, I always come back to a bloody Stratocaster. Always. Okay. So I've probably got 40 or 50 guitars, and that range from crappy down electros through to 8-string extended Ibanez, Prestige, and ESP things. Telecasters are fabulous. I've got a couple of Gibsons, but always it must be just, I don't know why, habit or something, but usually it ends up being the old Fiesta Red 56 Strat custom shop thing that I run around with.
Great.
Which is probably the simplest instrument in the entire menagerie. Menagerie, what's the word? It's just comfortable and does everything I need it to do.
Yeah,
but
cool.
What I do habitually and frustratingly, I think, even for myself, is continuously change pickups. I'm working with 3 or 4 different pickup manufacturers at the moment, including Chris Kingman, who's given me about 30 different sets. So I'm always swapping them in and out and checking out. That's kind of fun too.
Cool. So what pickups have you got in there at the moment?
At the moment, I've got a set of 4 Seasons bluesy sort of Strat pickups, and 4 Seasons are from, gosh, I better get this right, the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And they're just Alnico 4 and 5 standard moderate output Strat pickups, but they sound gorgeous. But normally it would be Mick Brealey's pickups. I've got a lot of guitars with his stuff in it. Mm-hmm. And next week it may be Mick Brealey's pickups again.
Sure.
But at the moment, they're these 4 Seasons pickups, which are great. And I've got a couple of custom Strats built for me by a fellow down here called Rob Butenhouse, another Dutchman. Yep. And it's a wood grain thing that you might have seen on a couple of the videos or even on stage, and it runs Chris Kingman's new pickups.
Okay. Are they the noiseless?
Zero hum, we call them, because the noiseless tag was appropriated or licensed at least by Fender.
Yeah.
And so Chris he calls them zero hum, but yes, the description would be there ain't no noise. Wow. Not even the Jazzmaster pickups, which are amazing. I've got a couple of, 6 Jazzmasters here. I reckon I've torn out all the pickups in them, and Chris Kingman's pickups in that, which sound better and no noise. Which is unusual for a Jazzmaster because they're usually hummy bastards.
Yeah. They have that funny, I don't know how to describe the extra metal hanging out the sides that. Yeah,
well, they're big, flat, single coil pickups for it, really.
Yeah.
And so there's this magnetic field just going everywhere, and unless you shield it incredibly well, or use something like Chris's pickups, you've got to live with that noise, which can be an additive to your music as well. Just look at Sonic Youth or Jay Mascis, or those sorts of people who will actually ride that noise. But, so I've kept 1 or 2 Japanese Jazzmasters with the original American pickups I put in them, and they've got the noise, and they're nice. But yeah, Chris's stuff's pretty good.
Cool. I think with the Fender, do you know the story? I think he was working with Fender at one stage, or they were in discussion about using his designs.
Yeah, I know that there was some sort of potential collaboration.
Okay.
That in the end, for one reason or another, didn't happen, and I don't know what those reasons are, and I've never probed Chris about it, who doesn't live in Australia anymore, by the way. I think he's in the Philippines now, and I've never, I've only known him really professionally for maybe a year or so, although we've admired each other from afar, which is flattering, for me at least. I knew there was some upset, and I don't want to even speculate on what that might have been.
Sure.
So I don't know the details or the facts, but it never eventuated, suffice to say, and he's still out on his own and doing quite well.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, can we talk about your YouTube channel? Now,
Yep.
I've got some numbers. I don't know if they're correct. You've been doing it for about 8 years or so?
Yep, started it as a sort of a backroom bit of fun in 2008. Mm-hmm. And by 2010, I'd been headhunted by a pro guitar shop, and it was a business concern. It became a business concern inside 2 years. So it was a tenacious, persistent effort to sort of make some sort of impact, be it good or bad, and in the end, it's worked out to be quite good.
Yeah. When you say quite good, I've heard somewhere between 12 and 16 million views. Is that right?
Well, it's actually more than that. It's about 22 million.
Oh, you're joking.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
That's on my channel, and then there's, on the Pro Guitar Shop channel, I don't even know. It would be probably the same again for my videos, because I know that they're up to about 200 mil.
Wow. So on any given day, like right now, there'll be people around the world, like there'll be thousands of people a day checking out your videos, checking out gear stuff.
300,000 hits a month I get.
Wow. That'll do it.
Give or take 5%. I watched the trends of, but it wasn't always like that, of course. When I first hit 500 views, I couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. And then 6 months later, it was 50,000. I thought, wow, this is actually, I might start soliciting for pedals from manufacturers, but I didn't have to because they started coming to me. Mm-hmm. I've got 100 pedals sitting outside there at the moment, and maybe a dozen amps from various manufacturers, including Roland and Blackstar, big ones. Yeah. And any guitars coming in here? There are a few guitars coming in, but just piles and piles of stuff. Earthquaker Devices sent me 8 pedals yesterday, and it takes a full day, unfortunately, to make a video, set it up, research the product, film it, edit it, master it. I was going to say upload it, but that 2-hour thing finished yesterday because now I've got the NBN.
Very good.
And get it online.
Thank you, Malcolm.
It's actually, but in terms of a working day, it's usually about 6 to 8 hours for any given product.
Okay. Wow, that's huge. And you do all that yourself in-house?
Yeah, well, I've got to, because there's no one else around here to do it. The skill set, and I say this in all humility, is very high. You've got to be right on top of Pro Tools. You've got to be right on top of Final Cut Pro. Know how to place microphones and cameras, and then have the. You've got to be able to present it. You've got to be able to make those pedals sound great with a particular style approach, and then be able to frame the picture. And you with me? So it's actually. You are very much a one-man show for all of those skills that are required, and it's expensive because we're talking about Canon cameras with $2,000 lenses, 3 Macs with the gruntiest CPUs in them. I could afford to do the crunching, the rendering, and then there's the amount of money and time invested in when the channel first started, because I wasn't being given pedals or anything, and still nothing's for free because you work for it. People don't understand it. Oh, he gets all these pedals for free. Well, I don't get them for free at all, because every time something comes through the door, it's work. It's another day's work.
Yeah.
So consequently, I now charge for it accordingly, which is why it's become a business and why I've got to sit here for the next 6 months and try and catch up with all the work.
That's cool. Some people would find that a fun problem. Hey, anyone with a smartphone can start a gear review channel, or dare I say it, a podcast.
Many do.
Yes. How come? What do you think? I think maybe you've answered this, but why do you think yours has taken off?
Well, I got in relatively early when there weren't too many people doing it. The only ones that were established of any note that I knew about were Gearman Dude, who I'm now friendly with.
Okay. And you see the guy that sounds like Jack Black?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He's actually a really friendly guy whose name I won't disclose.
Okay.
works in a guitar store down in Southern America, and loves playing the Rolling Stones, but does sound a lot like Jack Black and has the same kind of wry humour. So he's been pigeonholed, and I think he plays on that as
yeah.
Right. So there was him, and there was Andy, and Pro Guitar Shop had only just begun really, and at that point in time as well. So they were the benchmarks for me, and there weren't much other competition, and I'd always try to approach it with a degree of humour and objectively, in that I wanted to see on my videos at least what I would want to see if I was another person watching them. Mm-hmm. So it's not about me, it's about the product. So shut up, Brett, and just get on with demonstrating the product, but try to give you as accurate representation as possible, so the guy in the Arizona desert who can't get to a music shop because the nearest one is 250 miles away can actually have faith in the pedal that he orders online because Kingman has made it sound like this. So that's what I know I'm going to get.
Yeah, sure.
That's what's driven the success of the channel is audio and explanatory accuracy, I think, and so that it can be relied on.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like fairly early on you must have made a conscious decision to, I mean, the quality was always good, but you started miking up your amps.
The quality was not always. The quality was originally it was put the pedal here in front of the MacBook Pro, which is what I'm talking to you now, and just using the mic and the camera on it because I had nothing else. Sure. And then I borrowed a little Sony video cam from somebody who never got it back for 2 years, and then I got a decent microphone, and I stopped using GarageBand, and I stopped using iMovie, and I started using Pro Tools, and I started using Final Cut Pro, and I got bloody serious about it, and bought a Mac Pro, and then bought a Canon SLR camera that could shoot HD with a $2,000 lens, and I had to invest time and effort into it, and be tenacious about making it better every single time. And I still try to do that, although I know I do some pretty loose stuff. If I had a couple of whiskeys, I'll just turn the camera on and go for it, which is fun too. And funnily enough, they're pretty popular, those videos. But I always try to keep improving in some way or other. You know what the crazy thing is? Here's a mad story. I am a bass player, man. But the most popular videos on my channel by far are the bass videos. Really? Really. Wow. Have a look at the stats. You can bring it up if you want. We're talking, 400,000 views for some of that Tech 21 bass stuff. It's nutty. So either there's no bass players out there doing great videos channels, or they've just started, I hope so, or I can't explain it. Yeah. Just a little tidbit.
So there's an opportunity for someone out there.
Oh, much, yeah. Because I'm not much good at it. Well, I didn't think so. Anyway.
So apart from 100 odd pedals to review and some more touring when the weather warms up, have you got anything else sort of planned for the rest of this year, or has that tied you down for now?
I have a contract with MGM/Waterfront for 3 solo albums. Okay,
great.
Based on the ambient sort of stuff that I do when I'm mucking around out there, which people seem to love for some reason. I'm very grateful. That's all they want. So I'm going to try to at least, and I'm 3 years behind with the first one. Yeah. But I've got all the Pro Tools sessions from all of the videos that I've done, and we're talking 1,500 videos. So there's a lot of material to sift through. And a friend and I are going to go through it and hopefully get at least the first one out this year.
So when you say going through videos, you mean you're going to
go through the Pro Tools sessions to look for all the videos I do. 99% improvised compositions.
Okay, yeah.
To suit whatever I'm demonstrating, rather than occasionally I will learn, a Zakk Wylde solo or something like that. Pro Guitar Shop usually want you to play something that the viewer can reference.
Okay, sure.
So I do that, but really, I'm too lazy. I just can't do it, and I'm good at improvising, so I just make stuff up. So in the course of making all of this stuff up, there's usually some sort of melody involved, because that's the kind of musical background I came from, and I find it easy to do. So there's some pretty good stuff in there that is worthy of some post-production and just, throwing out as a 2 or 3 minute piece, a bit like the Aphex Twin would have done, with his electronic stuff. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, right, cool.
So it'll be a niche audience at best, listening audience. It's not something I'd want to tour. But the contract's there. They're waiting for the material, I think, still. And I'd like to do it just for fun. So cool. That's a side project, but the most important thing for me at the moment is to plough through all of this work that's been sitting there, some of it for longer than 18 months.
Cool. Well, Brett, man, thank you so much. You've given us a lot of time, and you've obviously, as you said, you've got a billion pedals out the back. You need to start plugging in eventually. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been
my great pleasure.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. And what's the best way for people to keep up to date with the stuff you're up to?
Well, my Facebook page is usually my point of communication, first point of communication, followed by YouTube, and you can subscribe to that channel quite easily. It's just one click.
Yep.
So if all they want to see or hear is YouTube demos, that's probably their best point of reference. If they want to see and hear or talk about other gear that may not be demoed, but that I'm discussing with my Facebook page rather, is a frequent point of communication for not just myself but all the people I know.
Yep.
And which is mainly industry people, so it's kind of interesting. Yeah, that's. And I have a website which I've criminally disregarded for the last year or so, just because I haven't had the bloody time to maintain it. But hello, Paul Hanna in Sydney, who put it up for me. Very clever designer, and I'd like to say that it would be a good point of a good one-stop shop, but at the moment I'm sorry that it's not. So YouTube or Facebook.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, I'll keep an eye out. We'll keep an eye out for some more gear reviews and those 3 solo ambient albums. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, they're a bit of fun, and then I'll be back on the stage with James and the rest of the crew in late October for, I think we're doing the Red Hot Summer Tour, but don't make me stick to that. One of the big outdoor runs, probably a couple of days on the greens, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, right. All right, that was my conversation with Brett Kingman in May 2016, and indeed there were a bunch of those huge live shows as part of that Red Hot Summer Festival. I remember Brett Garsett, our friend who we interviewed from John Farnham's band, was on a bunch of those dates as well, and it was lots of good gigging going on and lots more to come. All right, we're about to move over to my interview with Bob Spencer. We're going to start the interview with Bob playing a track off his much-anticipated solo album. But before we do that, here's a word from my friends Mick and Jeff from the Amps and Axes podcast.
Hey, podcast world. I'm Jeff Bober.
And I'm Mick Marcelino of Amps and Axes.
That's right. And we've got a cool podcast that talks with guitarists,
manufacturers,
engineers,
and techs.
Yeah, so check us out every Saturday on iTunes
and Google Play.
That's right.
And as we're always saying,
onward.
Welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Bob, when did you first start playing guitar?
Started when I was around 9, and my first lessons were at school. A really delightful brother at school. They were not all delightful, as you probably know, having heard about various ugly Morris Brothers things. But the guitar teacher that I had at school was a really good bloke who was smart enough to leave the brotherhood and get married. I began with him when I was around 9. The guitar was not my first instrument of choice. It was saxophone. And my dad, who's bigger than I am, he's kind of a big bloke, and I was a little bloke, he said that I was too small, and that was really it. He told me to choose something else. So for reasons that I can no longer remember, I chose guitar. And very quickly, I became pretty good. And within a few months of learning from Brother Edward at school, I knew what he knew, and I had to go outside and find a private guitar teacher, and I kept up my lessons until I was, I think, 16.
Okay, great.
So I learned for I guess what's that, 7 years, and being born in 1957 and learning when I did, it meant that I went through some of those exams that we used to have in the old days.
Okay.
And I found those certificates the other day, which is cute.
Very good.
So I learned for a long while that the lessons were short. Everything was half an hour in those days. And you didn't get to cover the things that I now believe are vitally important. We did things like scales and technique, and that's all great, but we did nothing with regards to playing guitar in a band, or how to play a groove, or how to get an appropriate sound, or what equipment might work or might not. We did none of that. I mean, zero, not a damn thing. And now, of course, being the age that I am and having played as long as I have, I realise that those things are of vital importance. It's wonderful to know modes, but if you don't know how to put that into a solo, or you don't know how to pull a guitar sound, then it's pretty useless, really.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, your knowledge becomes useless if you can't put it into practice. My thing is, a lot of my point of view is based on the goal of having my students play in a band. So, and you know, the appropriate high heels and latex to wear is one aspect, but the other things are you know, pulling a sound, what sort of pedals you might want to use, and accepting that there's no, and this opens up another doorway. There is no best. There's just stuff that you think works, and maybe more importantly, fun. I'm only interested in equipment that allows me to have fun. I'm not really interested in whether it sounds good or bad or anything, really. If I'm having fun playing through something, I'll find a way to make it work. Yeah,
cool. If you weren't learning about being in a band, did you start doing garage bands or something around then? So when you're around 16 or so?
Yeah, it was earlier than that. I joined my first garage band when I was maybe 12 or 13,
cool.
and the blokes in the band were 18, 19 years old, so it didn't last very long. They were talking about girls and cars and all sorts of things, and I had no idea what they were on about, so it didn't really last that long. On a playing level, I could keep up with them.
Yeah. What were you playing? What kind of tunes?
I recall doing things like Black Sabbath, stuff like that, and sort of writing our own material. It was very English based, as most of my listening was English based rock. And you know, rehearsing in the lounge room, that sort of thing. Didn't last very long, and then I think I must have been around 14 when I joined a Sydney band by the name of Finch, and they were 18, 19, 20 years old.
Okay.
So emotionally, I was, behind them. But again, playing wise, I was on par with them. So the band kind of worked, and I stayed with them for what was it, 4 or 5 years?
Okay. And you ended up doing albums and tours with those guys?
Oh yeah, we did my first album with them, which was a surfing album. A very famous surfer by the name of Peter Druin. If you're a surfer, you know that name.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else doesn't. We did an album for a film about him, and that was my first proper recording experience,
Wow.
which was great. I learned an enormous amount, and I asked a zillion questions, which is how I learn.
Yeah.
And then that had a couple of original tunes on it. Then later on, we did another album, a studio album of maybe it was 9 or 10 original tunes.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a couple of singles, and we did a lot of touring. And I was still at school. I completed my 12 years at school. So in the last couple of years at school, I was out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays gigging.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then on the road during my school holidays.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow. And your parents obviously were on board.
Yeah, my parents were cool with all of that. They were cool. They weren't cool in a lot of other ways, but they were cool with regards to me going out and playing, and they trusted me. And I didn't develop a drug habit or anything like that. And I was too sensible for that. So they trusted me, and I was hanging out with people a lot older, but there didn't seem to be any problems.
Yep.
Not that I'm aware of. I remember something funny where when I was about 16 or so, one of the parents at school chastised my parents for allowing me to be in a rock and roll band because they claimed that all musicians were drug addicts.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents stuck up for me. They were kind of like that. They would stick up for me as well.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah, it was kind of weird, but good. Yeah.
Awesome. What was your rig like then?
Oh, I had a late 50s Telecaster.
Wow.
With a homemade fuzz box. I wish I still had the fuzz box, of course, as we all do. And I played into a Leonard GB60 head with a Leonard 212 box.
Wow. That's awesome.
And it was great. I wouldn't mind having that rig back. If anyone has it, I would like it back. Thank you very much. I will pay for it. I would like it back.
Cool.
So that was my first real rig. And then I eventually went on to having 2 Wasp 100-watt heads and 2 Wasp quad boxes, as you did back then.
Great. It's a couple of good Aussie brands there, Leonard and Wasp.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and those sounds still inform me. And a lot of the bands that I saw were using Australian equipment.
Mm-hmm. So
I still remember the sound of Strauss, the ones that didn't explode, balls of fire. I remember the sounds of Strauss through JBLs. If you Strauss through JBL, I can hear that sound.
Wow.
I can still hear Wasps. They were the amps that were very common. Wasp, Leonard, things like Golden Tone, Moody.
Oh yeah,
that sort of thing.
Okay.
So those sounds they became familiar to me, and an interesting thing is even to this day they still sort of sound familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I grew up on. I'm not from England. Even though I was listening to English amps, what was around me at gigs were mostly Australian amps and Fenders, things like Fender Twins. People didn't use little Fenders that I remember. If you had a Fender, it was a Fender Twin.
Right, yeah.
And there were a few Marshalls around, of course, as well.
Yeah, cool. So when did you wind up with Finch?
When I joined the Skyhooks.
Okay, so it was a direct kind of shift over for you.
Yeah. Finch were going around in circles. We were a good band. Now, what I mean by that is that we played well and our singer sang very well. He's a very good singer. But we didn't have songs. We rather egotistically thought that we could get by being a good band. And I remember we were very concerned about how well we played.
Yep.
But we kind of missed the big picture, which is if you don't have songs, it really doesn't matter how well you play.
Sure.
So the band began going, excuse me, the band began going around in circles and doing the same gigs and not really increasing our audience and feeling a bit lost and having internal conflicts. And that was all brought to a head by us living in the same house in Melbourne.
Okay.
We moved to Melbourne. And I remember that there were 2 or 3 wives as well, and maybe 1 or 2 kids, and all in the same house. And that is just an absolute recipe for disaster. So I was very unhappy. That's the situation where you have your own cheese in the fridge and you don't want anybody else touching it.
Yeah,
that
sure.
sort of thing.
Yep.
It was terrible. And I had already become friends with Skyhooks because Finch supported them.
Oh, okay.
And
Yep.
I got along really well. I became a friend of Skyhooks. The other guys in the band didn't, but I did. And I kept in contact with Greg McCainch in particular. And one day, totally out of the blue, I used to see Greg socially. We'd see each other and write each other letters and postcards in those days.
Yep.
And keep in contact. And out of the blue, he called me and he left a message for me, and I called him back, and he said, "Can I see you when you get to Melbourne?" or something like that. I was, I don't know where we were, Ballarat or Morwell or something out in the Victorian country. And I said, sure. So I called him when I got back to Melbourne, and he said, well, Red's out. Would you like to join the band? And it was totally from left field, totally unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I thought, well, this is actually the opportunity I have to leave Finch regardless of what I do.
Sure.
Because Finch were going around in circles, and whether I join the Hooks or not, I really need to leave this other band. And it turns out that I did join Skyhooks, yeah.
Wow, brilliant.
And it was great. It was the biggest learning curve I've ever experienced in music.
Yeah. What kind of things would you learn?
Arrangements, attention to detail in terms of arrangements, how songs, watching Greg shape the songs.
Yeah, because he was
Greg
was the main songwriter in Skyhooks?
It's pretty much the only songwriter.
Okay.
Red wrote a couple of things, but
right.
But Greg wrote, out of I don't know how many albums the band had, 5 albums, he probably wrote all but 4 songs.
Wow.
So he was, and it's his band. It's always been his band, and I'm happy to say it's Greg's band. That's not a problem. It's not an issue. But I learned a lot just watching the way he put songs together and listening to the demos and then learning the parts, and the band were totally on top of the business end, which I'd never seen before.
Okay.
They were absolutely on top of it. Everybody worked for them. Mushroom Records worked for them. Michael Gudinski worked for them. The road crew, everybody. It was very clear who was at the top of the tree, and that was the band.
Mm-hmm.
And the band steered everything. And it was the most amazing experience to have, particularly as a young lad. I was 19 when I joined the band.
Okay, yep.
And they were also the most professional band I'd ever seen. The first time I saw Skyhooks, and I've told this story before, I'd heard them on the radio, and I thought the songs were really well done, really well done, very clever, very interesting, very clever. and I went with Finch to see them, and Skyhooks played their first gig under the pylons of the Harbour Bridge in Sydney. Must have been 74.
Okay. Wow.
Ish. And we all went, and I was just hanging to hate them because I was convinced that they were fags from Melbourne, and in the nicest possible way back then. You know, we're thinking
Yeah,
70s.
sure,
Okay?
sure.
It's not an anti-gay thing. And I was really kind of wanting to dislike them because they were fantastic, but they were from Melbourne, and I thought, well, this is not going to float. And they totally blew my mind. They were on another level. Now, I had seen bands like Sherbet. I'd seen Sherbet close up a number of times because Finch had supported them many times. So they were friends of mine, and I used to see them at nightclubs, and I'd seen the gigs. And so I'd seen Sherbet and Thorpe and the Lardydales, and I'd seen all the what were the top bands. And Skyhooks made everybody sound like they were still at Mum and Dad's garage. That gig that I saw in Sydney was frightening. It was really kind of scary.
Wow.
Oh, that's what you have to do if you really want to be good. That's what you have to do. Everything was together.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it. So I was converted, of course, but I didn't meet them until, I don't know, a year later.
Okay.
I don't really remember. Maybe a couple of years later, whatever it was.
Sure. And which albums were you involved with?
The first album, I only did 2 or 3. Did a live album called Live Be In It, which is a good live album, and a studio album which had women in uniform on it. That was called Guilty Until Proven Insane, which has got some good work, some work that I'm very, very happy with on that album. I was only 19 when I recorded it, but good guitar sounds, well recorded, well produced. Shirl left. Shirl was replaced by a lovely man by the name of Tony Williams, but basically the band fell apart. Okay. We did another album which I think is awful, which we all think is awful, sounds awful, terrible, and then we broke up. And then I supported myself. I played with various people. I played with John English and Russell Morris and John Swan and whatever.
Okay.
But I supported myself by being an audio engineer. I was a working recording engineer for a few years.
Oh, okay. So this is in Melbourne, so you stayed down there?
This is back in Sydney. I moved to Sydney.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've always loved recording. I'm quite addicted to recording.
Okay.
And ever since I was very young, I've wanted to know about everything that's going on, especially in the studio. So I got to do that full time for a few years.
Great. And where were you working doing that stuff?
A couple of studios in Sydney.
Yeah.
Reel-to-reel studios.
Yeah.
That don't exist anymore.
Okay, sure.
But working with tape and big desks and all that was great. Awesome. It was a really good learning experience. And then I joined the Angels. Again, same sort of thing. There was no plan. Rick Brewster, in particular, had been a friend of mine for a very long while because I met the Angels before they were the Angels when they moved to Sydney in 72 or 3 or something.
Okay, because they were up from Adelaide, weren't they?
Adelaide.
Yeah.
So I met them back then, and we did gigs with them in Finch. And Rick was a mate, and we used to see each other. And I had another band going for a little while, and we did some Angel supports. It's all very friendly. And in those days, we used to do a little bit of hanging out together, and we'd see each other at gigs afterwards, nightclubs and whatever. So one day I was on the phone with Rick, and I called him about the studio that I was working in, and I called him to let him know that if he wanted to do some demos then let me know and I could get him a good rate to do demos in a studio. And he said, oh, cool. And I asked him, what you doing? How's it going? And he said, oh, John just left the band. And I said, oh, well, if you want a guitar player, let me know. So the next thing I was in the band.
Okay.
It was, it was just one of those things. You're on the phone and someone says blah, and you go, oh, blah. And he says, oh, blah, blah, blah. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you're doing something together.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it is. I don't mean to diminish it at all. It was cool, but it's just, that's what happens when you have friends who are doing, I'm sure it happens with, carpenters and alpha mechanics and all sorts of people.
Sure, yeah.
I'm sure that stuff happens in IT and whatever.
Yeah.
That's just what happened with us. I don't know how it happens now. There don't seem to be those after-hours clubs that bands go to like we used to. Plus, the music scene is quite small compared with what it was when I was a kid, and there were lots of bands, and we used to do socialising, and so you'd find out what was going on.
Yeah, right. So when was this? This is around 84?
Oh, no, I think I joined the Angels in 80. Oh God, was it 85 or 86?
Okay. Yeah.
Angels fans know more about this stuff than I do.
Yeah, right.
I just don't. I don't think in those terms.
Yeah.
Sometimes I remember the years, but I don't really focus on them.
Yeah.
So I think I joined in 85.
Okay.
85 sounds about right.
Okay. So both these bands, you replaced Red Simons in Skyhooks and then John Brewster. Yep. Both those guys are predominantly rhythm players. I mean, they do some parts, but predominantly rhythm guys. You come in with a whole different slant. Was there ever, was there much adjustment in either of those bands? You come in as a lead player when there's an established kind of lead player there already?
Well, the Red used to play a lot of lead lines.
Okay.
An interesting thing about Skyhooks is that the rhythm lead thing is, if you forget about the solos, what's going on the rest of the time is quite mixed.
It was quite intricate, yeah.
It's very intricate, extremely intricate. So the hard work for me in Skyhooks was learning to play those parts in a really tidy, nimble fashion.
Yeah.
I've always been a nimble player, not a fast player, but I have reasonable accuracy. Learning to play those parts so that they were always absolutely repeatable and in sync with Greg. A lot of the guitar parts are doubled with the bass.
Okay, yeah.
So learning to play those guitar parts synced with Greg and Bob Starkey was a chore. It was hard. My phrasing was different from their phrasing. I hear triplets different to this day.
Okay.
I hear them slightly differently from how they hear triplets.
Yeah.
And there were little adjustments like that. And playing songs that Greg wrote, unlike what I was doing previously, playing songs that I wrote, because I wrote most of the music for Finch. Mm-hmm. So I wrote and played material, which is pretty easy, or I played Free, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, which is all pretty easy. And then you compare that with Skyhooks, where I had to learn parts that were written by Greg, which were nothing like Deep Purple or Black Sabbath or Grand Funk Railroad or any of that stuff. They were very, very particular parts. So that was the chore for me. And I don't mean chore in a bad way.
Sure.
That was my task.
That was the work of it, yeah.
Task is a better word. My task was to learn to play those parts as Greg wrote them.
So when you came into the Angels, was the original brief, we just filling John's parts to start with?
Yeah. It was easy. I was just playing rhythm parts. I don't play like John. John's older than I am, and he comes from a different background from me. John and Doc were 10 years older than I am. So John has more of I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but he has a bit of the kind of 50s thing and also some of the 60s folk thing.
Mm-hmm.
He really likes Bob Dylan.
Yeah, sure.
So I didn't come from anything like that. I came from rhythm players who slashed their guitars. My background in rhythm playing is Paul Kossoff, Pete Townsend.
Mm-hmm.
It's, those two guys, I guess. So there was a difference. No, I don't think a bad difference, but it was a little bit different. And the guitar parts that John played were pretty much the same parts that Rick played.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of the Angels is what a friend of mine calls the monolithic guitar sound.
That's perfect. That's such a great description.
It's really good. So I learned those guitar parts and played them to the best of my ability. They don't sound like John, but John doesn't sound like me.
Yeah, sure.
So I played the rhythm parts, and I didn't play any lead stuff at all. And then it just became pretty obvious that, well, Bob can play lead. It's another thing that we can sell. So I was obviously writing for the band.
Yeah, I was going to ask what was the process for writing? Because was it with Rick? Was he the other sort of main writer?
Yeah. Well, I've never stopped writing.
Yeah.
So I wrote most of the music for the band I was in earlier, Finch. Yeah. And I'd never stopped. So I built up a whole stack of music while I was in Skyhooks. Mm-hmm. Then I had a couple of original bands that went nowhere after Skyhooks, lots and lots of original songs. So I joined the Angels with I already had a back catalogue of lots of different bits and pieces.
Okay,
and
yep.
I just played them to Rick and he'd go, I like that. So that would turn into a song.
Yeah, cool.
I'd do a demo at home on my 4-track or what later became an 8-track.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd play them to the band, and if the band liked them, we'd record them. And it just so happened that pretty much everything that I think that everything I gave to the band recorded.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so again, no grand plan. It's just what I do. I write all the time. In fact, the problem for me is that I write too much and it interferes with my life.
Okay.
I'm forever putting down ideas.
Yeah.
So writing for the band came very naturally, and what I did was I was kind of selective about what I gave the band. I tried not to give the band stuff that those people couldn't really get their teeth stuck into. Yeah. There was no point giving Doc a vocal part that was, for example, out of his range, mm-hmm. or whatever. So the material that I presented to the band was stuff that I thought the band would be able to deliver.
Yeah, cool.
And it turned out that it kind of worked. So first album I did with the band, there were a couple of my things on it, and then by the time of Beyond Salvation, a lot of that music is mine. I don't want to take credit for lyrics and melody. Mm-hmm. Some melodies maybe, but not lyrics. But a lot of the music is mine.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest album from the Angels.
It was. And obviously I wrote with Rick, and Rick's no slouch when it comes to writing riffs.
Mm-hmm.
So Rick provided a lot of stuff on that album.
Yeah, cool.
And he, most of the lyrics on that album are Rick.
Okay, yep. Cool.
That doesn't mean he didn't write music. He did.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get this stuff across.
Yeah, sure.
Really. But my involvement was music, and Rick's involvement was music and lyrics, and there were other lyrics written by Brent Eccles, and literally a few lines written by Doc, I think.
Okay, yep.
Doc really wasn't writing at all. From the time I joined the band, Doc wasn't involved in the writing.
Okay.
I don't know what happened. I've only heard stories, but I don't literally know what happened when Doc was writing before I was in the band, because I wasn't there.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I can't inform. But while I was in the band, no, he wrote like almost nothing.
I always thought you and Rick were a good team.
Great team. I love Rick.
Yeah, he's one of the I don't know, just such a iconic melodic kind of soloist. And,
yeah, look, I use his solos to teach my students.
Okay, yeah.
They tick so many boxes. And what's great about his solos is that they are the antithesis of guitar solos. They are compositions. So whereas most guitar players would think about what licks can I throw out,
Yeah.
Rick doesn't think like that at all. He thinks what melody do I want, and then he happens to play it on guitar.
Yeah, cool.
Which is another task I give my students, by the way, to write solos in their heads, and then play them, but not the other way around. It's just a task. It's a device. So Rick's fantastic at that.
Yeah, great. I'd add the point is for me though, Rick's so melodic, but so are you. Like,
in a different way.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking like solos like the Dogs.
Yeah.
The solo in that super melodic. You could sing it. Your grandmother could sing it, and it's still rocking and aggressive, but it's quite tuneful.
I hope to have to do solos that people can sort of see.
Yeah.
So when and I did that. There's this that single thing I have called "Who Are These People?"
Yeah,
if you've heard the solo in that,
I have.
Right? It's the same sort of thing. It's kind of kooky and wacky, but there's a story going on. You can kind of see it. So what I go for is that's how I approach a solo. I want to be able to kind of see the image of the solo.
Okay. Yep.
And so Dogs Are Talking for me is that sort of solo. I'm sorry to sound like a bloody hippie, but I sort of see the structure of the solo.
Okay. Yep.
And I hope that people can remember how the solo sounds.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I aim for, because I don't think there's much point in playing a solo that everybody forgets. You think, well, why have a solo in the first place?
For sure.
Am I just showing off? You know. So Rick, anyway, back to Rick. Rick's fantastic at doing that, at writing melodic solos, and I loved that about working with him, and I still love that about hearing him. I played with them a few weeks ago in Sydney.
Okay.
I just did a few songs, and those solos, they're magic. And the great thing about what he plays is you pretty much can't imagine those songs without those solos.
Yeah, definitely.
They would be severely lacking something. So I think that's a wonderful thing. That's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, cool. And I'd argue the same for yours. Absolutely. The
Thank you.
that track you mentioned.
Who Are These People?
Who Are These People? Yeah, what a great tune. I love that solo. It was like classic Spencer.
Thank you.
Super melodic and ripping. So that's from your solo album that you're putting together at the moment?
That's right. So I embarked on this scary crowdfunding journey,
Yeah.
and that went pretty well. Now I have to deliver the album, of course, so I'm spending the next 3 months at home recording it.
Yeah.
Who Are These People is, I guess that would be the lightest track of the 12.
Okay. Yeah.
A few of the other things are just big, slow monster grooves.
Cool.
Yeah, but at least another few of them. And there will be one instrumental song. There's a song called Marubra, which is, I guess, a surf song.
Yeah, cool.
But the rest will be I'm singing on them as well.
Yeah, great. Well, you've always sung BVs and things.
Yeah, I've sung BVs, and now it's kind of path of least resistance, Matt. It's I could work with a singer, and let's face it, most of the planets sing better than I do. But it's really about when I can get together with somebody and work, and how much time we've got, and whether we can coordinate, and how it's going to go, and all that sort of stuff. And it's just easier. I'm not saying it's better, but it's just easier for me to continue doing it by myself.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah.
That's what I'll do.
I mean, who are those people? You deliver it perfectly. It's that whole sardonic kind of take on the net. And
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I wanted to be really kind of ordinary.
yeah.
So I didn't want to try and sound like a real singer, because I wanted the song to be delivered in a way that anyone could just, almost talk along with it.
Yeah, sure. Cool.
So, yeah, but it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, great. So that track is pretty much done, I guess.
That track's done. I'll tweak the mix probably for the album.
Yeah.
But I'm not re-recording anything. I'm over, and I don't want to listen to it again at all for a long, long while. So cool. That's done. And today I've been working on a song called "When the Devil Gets to Heaven," which is that sort of big groove.
Yeah, cool.
And that's got a drop D in it.
Oh yeah.
But it's not chugga chugga. Doesn't. And yeah, I'm just going to continue working here at home. I have a very small room and a small setup, but I use an amp made by Ivan Richards.
Oh yeah. Yep.
You know Ivan, who lives in Gosford?
Yeah, I know of his amps, definitely. Yeah.
Right. So I've got an Ivan Richards amp, a few pedals, and I've built myself an isolation box. Actually, you can see it. Can you see this big coloured thing? Right? See, it says Bob Star, my little girl.
That is great.
Okay.
I'll have to get a picture for the podcast, guys.
You see inside it?
That is awesome.
I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, that's great.
So a few mics in there and a 12-inch speaker box.
Yeah, cool.
Which I can pull out if I'm ever doing small gigs.
Yeah, nice.
And that's the sound that you hear on "Who Are These People" is just one Ivan Richards amp going into one speaker with. I don't think I used any pedals.
Okay.
I think the solo has an Ivan Richards blues drive on it.
Oh, okay, yep.
To make it middly, really middly.
Yeah.
I like solos to be really focused in the mid-range, really focused in the mid-range. But other than that, it's all pretty ordinary, guitar, amplifier. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. What's the red guitar you're using in the clip?
The red guitar is made by a lovely chap from the Victorian country by the name of Jeremy Johnson.
Cool.
And it looks, what attracted me to it in the first place was because it kind of looks like an old Guiatone.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And Jeremy and I tweaked the shape a little bit, but in terms of build, it's pretty normal stuff. It's a mahogany body, a mahogany neck. ebony fretboard, and pickups by the master pickup builder, Mick Briley.
Okay, cool.
And so I have Mick Briley's in 1, 2, 3, 4. Mick Briley's in 6 guitars.
Wow, there you go. The
So I love his work.
they look really cool. They've got the foil kind of cover.
That one,
that one.
yeah, those, so they're like a filler shave razor. Yeah.
Nice.
It's a low output pickups,
Okay.
and those ones are a little bit bright,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit bright and low. I really like low output pickups. I'm not big on high output pickups. I figure if you want more dirt, just turn your amp up or use a fuzz box or something. So all the pickups I've got are reasonably low output.
Okay.
And
cool.
I've stopped taking notice of what magnets are in them.
Yeah.
I don't want to know anymore. I went through years of wanting to know everything.
Yeah.
And now I just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
So I call Mick and I vaguely explain, if I can, what I'm after, and he makes something and they appear in the post, and only once have I said I don't like this.
Mm-hmm.
And he's made me new ones,
Yeah,
but every other time what has turned up goes into the guitars.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, I interrupted you. Sorry, you were talking about pulling guitar sounds before I asked you about your guitar.
I find it pretty easy.
Yeah.
And look, I don't know why I find it easy. That's something I haven't really thought about. But I find that getting a guitar sound is not all that hard. Maybe it's because when I'm recording, I'm not thinking about getting a great guitar sound. I'm thinking of getting a sound that I think will suit the song,
Mm-hmm.
and that will suit the other instruments in the song, so everything will happily live together.
Yeah, right.
But I think it's pretty simple. You get an amp that you like, and if you're recording, there's no reason to have a loud amplifier. If you happen to like a loud amplifier, that's great, but there's no reason to have a loud amplifier purely because it's loud. So an amplifier that you think the tone is pretty good rather than the volume is really loud. That a rig that is responsive to your way of playing. Don't try and get a sound where you're trying to just mirror image or copy somebody else's sound, because you're not them, you don't play like them. And I think keeping those things in mind, it's not all that hard to get a guitar sound. I am careful. I don't want you to take that like I'm not careful. I am careful. Recording on slightly on the cleaner side of dirty helps.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's in the mix.
Yep.
If things are too dirty, you lose the front of the note, and the front of the note is the bit that I'm really concerned about. I'm not really concerned about sustain. I don't really care if guitars sustain or not. Well, if they don't sustain at all, they sound like a banjo. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
A banjo is all front and no sustain.
Yeah, right. Cool.
So.
It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, so if you get to all front and no sustain, it sounds like a banjo. So that's probably not something you want to do. But the beginning of the note really concerns me, and a little bit of sustain. But I'm not one of those people who want a guitar to sustain forever. That interferes with my rhythm playing.
Okay. Yeah.
If a guitar sustains a lot, I can't play rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
It goes against my rhythm style. So I set up everything for a rhythm sound. I don't really set up for solo sounds. I set up for rhythm sounds, and hit a stomp box or turn your guitar up for the solo.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. So a lot of guys would do it the total opposite way. Set up for the solo and then.
Oh God, no.
Yeah.
I reckon. Well, why? At a gig, I don't know what percentage of the time you're playing rhythm, but I'm guessing 95% of the time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
90% of the time. So if I have to do a sound check quickly, like at a gig, let's say it's one of those things where you just drive to the gig and get up on stage and play, and with an unknown amp, all I do is hit a couple of A chords. If I can get an A chord to sound pretty good, and I carry with me one stomp box like a Richards Blues Drive, then I'm done. If I can get my A chord to sound cool, then I just put the stomp box on the floor. I don't even need to check it. I know it's all going to work.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
I set up from a rhythm point of view, I don't set up anything from a solo point of view. I reckon that's the easy bit. I know guitar players stress about solo sounds. I just don't think that's the hard bit. My focus is always getting a rhythm sound.
Yeah,
and
cool.
for me, the solo sound follows. So that's just the way, it's just, as you know, you've interviewed a million guys. Everybody's got a different point of view.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hey, I've got a couple of questions from the Facebook. I told a few people I was speaking to you, and a couple of people had some questions. Zog's guitar strings. Chris Churchwood, my mate, asked, are you still using Zog's guitar strings?
No, I'm not, but I'm still using no, the short answer is no, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
However, we need to go back in time to 1977, when it first dawned on me that the gauges that we were being sold were wrong.
Okay.
So since 1977, and I remember the gig, it was actually at the Canberra University.
Yeah.
With Skyhooks. I recall going, this is wrong, and I went out and bought different gauge strings. So from 1977, I've used my own custom gauge strings.
Okay. So what were they? What was the gauge you had a problem with?
I had a problem with everything I bought, whether it was 9 to 42 or 10 to 46 or 10 to 52. They all felt kind of wrong to me.
Okay.
Now I know that the reason they felt wrong is because the tensions are all over the place. Mm-hmm. Okay, so from 1977, I started to put together my own string sets, normally with a 10 on top.
Yeah.
So they were around 10 to around 60. So I used that for a number of years, and then I eventually got to 12 to 66. Again, my own custom gauge based on how they feel.
Yeah.
And then years ago, I got so there is a story. I had a wrist problem.
Okay.
And I freaked out. So I went to light strings.
Yeah.
And then, so I started putting together my own light gauges, and they were around 9. This is very light.
Yeah.
Around 9, ending on around 50.
Okay.
And it just so happens that somewhere along the line I was introduced to Zog strings. I can't remember how. I was probably Googling. And so I bought some Zog strings. And the thing about them is the graduated tension. Now, the only reason I'm not using them anymore is because I like the sound of GHS strings. Mm-hmm. So I'm currently using a gauge I put together of GHS, which goes for any of the geeks. I'm assuming you have geeks.
Yeah.
My gauge is 9, 12, 16, 24, 32, 50.
Wow. That's a big jump on the end.
Well, it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, wow.
And
cool.
That's the whole thing. It allows me to still play the rhythm I played.
Yep.
And play fiddly bits.
Yeah, cool.
So the only reason I went off the Zogs is because I felt they didn't sound quite as snappy as the GHS. The GHS, to my ears, sound a bit snappier. I'm just about to try the new D'Addario NY strings or something strings.
Yeah, right.
They're setting me my custom gauge.
Oh, cool.
So in singles.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and I advise everybody to mess around with gauges to find what feels right for you.
Yeah.
You know, just because, I don't know, Rory Gallagher used it or Jimi Hendrix or Slash, that's lovely. But if it doesn't feel right for you, then Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
It's the same when it comes to equipment. There's no point in saying my favourite guitar player is, I don't know, mention somebody, therefore I'm going to use his rig.
Sure.
It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me anyway. So I'd suggest that players find what works for them.
Yeah.
It's like a car, car that you enjoy driving, I might not enjoy driving. So that's the long answer about the Zogs.
Yeah, right. Cool.
I love the tension.
Yeah.
But I'm now enjoying the GHS snappiness a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, another question was, do you prefer live tracking or overdubs, or I guess with your home studio? Yeah.
I love it all.
Yeah.
I love it all. Yeah. I love the whole process, Matt. I love being with other people and tracking together. I love being by myself and honing my parts. I don't like any one part of it anymore. What I miss, I can say what I miss is I miss the friction in a band. I think friction is a good thing, and working by myself means that I don't have anyone to argue with, and that can be a bit of a drag. Yeah, you think you have all this freedom, but in fact that can be a bit restricting. I think friction is a good thing, so I miss having a little bit of friction with people I trust and like. By the way, not idiots. Yeah, I miss friction with idiots.
Yeah. So like a creative, a creative kind of friction.
Yeah.
Cool, awesome. So the album comes out in around October, is that right?
Yeah, we're aiming for October. That's what I've promised people, so that's what it will be. Now, the tunes are all written.
Yeah.
So now it's just a matter of putting down the drum tracks for a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And staying at home and recording them, and then going through the grief of mixing and mastering and all that. So, yeah, I'm really happy to be doing it, and I just need to get it out of my system, Matt.
Cool.
All these things out of my system.
Well, we're glad you're doing it, because the bits we've heard so far are awesome. So that's cool.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah. What's the best way for people to keep up to date with the album and just what you're doing in general?
Well, Facebook is the way to do it at the moment. So I have a Facebook page which is /Bob Spencer Official. Right? Bob Spencer Official is the Facebook page.
Okay,
I'm not terribly good with Instagram and Twitter.
Sure.
Just because I forget there are other things to do during the day.
Yeah, definitely.
So the other thing I will do is start blogging on my website, which is bobspencer.com.au. I'll start doing that soonish.
Okay,
doing
cool.
some video blogs. So I intend to do some geeky stuff.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is what sort of microphone I like this week.
Yeah,
and
great.
I'll do some geeky stuff like that. Bearing in mind that this is just what works for me.
Yeah.
And you might go, that is just the dumbest rig I've ever seen. And that's fine.
Cool.
So I'll do some geeky stuff, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Well, we'll look out for that, definitely, and we'll keep plugging along the process. That's great. So, Bob, mate, thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure.
Mate, I've seen you play over the years in different places around Sydney anyway when you're up in town. So it's it's a great thrill and a pleasure to have met you and talked guitars with you. It's really cool.
Oh, I really appreciate your time, Matt. Thank you very much.
Cool. Cheers. All right, we'll talk soon and we'll look out for the next geeky update from you.
All right. Take care, mate. Thanks
Cheers,
a lot.
mate. See ya.
All right. Ciao.
All right, there it was, Bob Spencer and Brett Kingman, both in replay from 2016. Those guys both doing some really great stuff. They'll be at the Melbourne Guitar Show coming up in early August 2017. Check that out. And remember, we'll be back on July 8th or 9th with all new episodes of the Guitar Speak podcast. But I hope you enjoyed today's conversations, and we'll be back with you soon. Remember, we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and all that kind of stuff. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. All right, my name is Matt Wakeling. We're out of here. We'll see you next time on the Guitar Speak podcast. Bye now.